Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking. And I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, we will continue our focus on holistic healing and spirituality. And to do this, my guest is my very good friend and colleague, Bryn Blankinship. Bryn, in my opinion, is one of the top spiritual regressionists practicing in the field today. She is a hypnotherapist, author, and international instructor, specializing in past life and between lives spiritual regression. She is also a contributing author to two very popular books on the subject of past lives. One is Brian Weiss's latest release, Miracles Happen, containing Bryn's case study entitled Embracing Equality. And the other book, which is one of my personal favorites, Michael Newton's Memories of the Afterlife. And Bryn's contribution can be found in Chapter 3, When Children Teach from the Grave. Bryn is also currently working on her own book, calling from her extensive experience in the field of spiritual regression, and she is also involved in a past life television project which will be unveiled in the very near future. She is an IAC board certified hypnosis instructor and an international lead instructor for the Michael Newton Institute, where she served for 7 years on their board as vice president and director of membership for Life Between Lives Spiritual Regressionists. Bryn's practice is Hypnotic Solutions Hypnosis Center, which is located in Wilmington, North Carolina. So to kick our discussion off, I asked Bryn about her journey and how she landed where she is today. And here's what she had to say.
Well, I've always believed and had an interest in past lives and have always been curious about some of my own and why I was drawn to some of the things that I was drawn to. And it's kind of funny because in my situation, I really didn't know any people that did this kind of work. And I was studying herbs and iridology. And one day I was with my friend and one of my classmates, and we had gone to this health food store. And she introduced me to this lady that we ran into. And she said, oh, by the way, she does rebirthing. My eyes got really big when I heard that. And I was trying to be polite. And then they went on to explain for a minute rebirthing. And you have to remember, about this time, I was about 23 years old, and I had never heard of rebirthing, and I'm wondering why in the world somebody would go do that and what benefit it would be. And fast forward 20 years, and it hit me one day when I was doing an age regression into a womb regression session for a client, that I was actually doing a rebirthing session. It was just called something else. And I almost fell out of my chair laughing because it hit me, oh, this is why somebody would do rebirthing, and this is what the benefit would be. So from that time, I did find somebody to do a past life session with, and I just found it so interesting. And we worked on stage fright because I had moved out of my legal job and was moving into acting. And I'd been studying acting with a coach out of LA, and he would fly out and work with a group of us. And I'd done that for a few years. But what would happen is when the camera would get on me or when it was time to go on stage, you have those few minutes where it's right before you go on and you really don't have anything to do but just sit there and wait, and all the stress would build up. I would say to myself, wonder what would happen if you went out in front of all those people and forgot your lines. That would be awful. And, I'd say these negative things to myself right before I'm supposed to go out. And anyway, we did the past life session, and it was great. I mean, it went back into the past lives. It helped me to understand. I've had, several past lives as an actor and as a singer. And it's interesting that I don't sing at all this time. And so it helped me move through a lot of blocks and a lot of things that were holding me back. And so going out to LA, a lot of things opened up for me. Even though I was working and doing a lot of commercial work and a little bit of TV and film, I knew that what I liked the most was all the work that we did behind the scenes, more than actually being on camera and performing. The transformation that had gotten me to the place to go out there. So I studied hypnosis and then came back to Wilmington, and I studied more and more and more and have been doing this work ever since.
So, Bryn, the past lives that you had, did it help you with the stage fright?
Oh, definitely. Because it helped me get past this 1 minute in time, and it helped me to see things from a broader perspective. When you see the bigger picture, you're not held up by some of the details. One of those sessions that really comes to mind, it actually turned into a future progression. But as we went back through time, it flipped. And I saw this scene where I'm standing in this prairie grass, and there's my dressing room, and we're on location, and it's got my name on the door, and it's got a big star. And I knew I was on location shooting something for a project. And that was like a glimpse that was given to me. And then I really did end up in LA on location in the area they call the Grapevine. About a year and a half after that session, everything came full circle. There's my dressing room. There's the star. I look down at my feet. It's the same prairie grass. I was wearing the same shoes because they had me dressed in a costume. I wasn't wearing my own shoes in the vision I had gotten a glimpse of a year and a half before. I'm wearing the shoes that they had me dressed in for the set that day when I looked down, but I all of a sudden had a flashback to the office where I was in that recliner and having that session. And here I was standing in the middle of it. I was in the middle of what they told me was coming. It was just really powerful, and it just helped me know that help was available. Help beyond me was up there, out there to support me, and that things that were in me were coming to the surface because they're things I needed to go do. This burning passion that I had inside me was something that was coming through me to go do. I wasn't making it up. It wasn't fantasy. I really did have a burning desire to do the acting. I spent 10 years, in classes and working and doing all kinds of things, where I could have gone off and done something else and made a lot more money, but I really loved what I was doing. I was just trying to find, what I needed to do next. And then out of that, it led me to the hypnosis and the past lives and all of that.
So how did you get started, Bryn? How did you know who to seek out for your training?
So when I was in Los Angeles, I stayed and I took some training with the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. And I didn't get past life training there, but what was interesting is Florence Henderson's husband owns that school, George Kappas, and he passed away just a couple of years ago. So here I am trying to leave the acting world, trying to move into this new career as a hypnotherapist, and all the video that they had in the library, most of it where they were demonstrating techniques, is Florence Henderson, the Brady Bunch mom, there on video. So even though I'm transitioning out of acting, there she is in my hypnosis trainings, and that's how she and her husband had met, and she's a really good subject, so they used her for the demonstrations. And then in those classes, of other hypnotherapists, I just made some friends, and we stayed in touch, and I would learn through other hypnotherapists who they studied with and where they went to. So I came back to North Carolina, came back to Wilmington, and then I would leave and travel to other places to get training. I studied with Roger Wolger, Brian Weiss, Michael Newton, Henry Bolduc. I studied with some of the best people that I could find who were well known in their field. I read their books, and the books really touched me, so I would reach out and try to find another training. But a lot of it's word of mouth through the profession.
Well, those are some very big names, so you've studied with some of the biggies in the business.
Well, that training was invaluable. I can't tell. It was some of the best times of my life were in the trainings with those people and students, and, just some friendships that I've made that have really, they've been around for a long time through the bonds that you make, because it's such emotional work that you do, doing hypnosis and exploring past lives. And, unfortunately, 3 of those teachers have now passed.
Yeah.
If I hadn't studied with them when I did, the opportunity wouldn't have been there.
How long have you been practicing past life regression, Bryn?
Well, my first hypnosis course was in 2001, and past lives, I think I took that in 2002.
Okay.
And then I studied with Michael Newton in 2003, and he, his work is the body of work that's known as Life Between Lives Hypnotherapy. And at that time, he was about to retire, so I studied with him. Well, he didn't retire. He did briefly, and then he came out of retirement, and we actually started the Newton Institute. And I was a board member there for 7 years. I was one of the original board members for the Newton Institute, and it's a body of hypnotherapists that do the spiritual regression, life between lives, which, it's just a step beyond the past life session, which I'm sure we're going to talk more about past lives and the difference between that and a life between lives session.
Yeah, so you've been at it now for over a decade then.
Yeah. Well, I also studied with Brian Weiss, and through that, I have some a case study in one of his books as well. I've been very fortunate with the teachers that I've had the opportunity to study with.
So, Bryn, when clients come in to come see you to do a past life session,
hmm
as an example, why do clients seek a PLR?
Oh, okay. Well, a lot of times they're curious. I would say curious about their past lives, curious about who they've been before, or some of the things that interest them. In other cases, it's people, places, and things that they're repelled by or have no desire to be near. Sometimes it's for spiritual exploration. And then sometimes people have that nagging issue that it's nagging at them to where they've tried a lot of things to work on that issue and they feel like it's coming from something beyond current life, like a fear of fire or a fear of drowning that is unexplainable in current life because they've never been in a fire. Sometimes the sound of the fireworks can set off a memory of being in a past life where you're being shot at. And that's something that you would need to go in through past life regression and work through and just help the body calm down from the memory that's being carried forward.
The planet is going through an awakening now. More and more people becoming more consciously aware. Now, you've been at it now for over a decade. If you had to take a look back and where you started and to where you are today, are you seeing more and more people coming in for this type of experience?
Definitely. In fact, when we were driving cross country to come back to Wilmington, small little town on the coast of North Carolina, my husband said to me, "So, you're going to head back and you're going to get an office job, right?" And I said, "Oh, no. I'm going to be a past life regressionist and I'm going to go home and study some more. I've got some names of some people I'm going to go study with, and I'm going to be a past life regressionist and have an office, and people are going to come to me." And I thought he was going to drive off the road. He was trying to be supportive, but at the same time, he said, "That's really great, and I know you'll be good at it, but who is going to come see you?" And I said, "Oh, honey, if you build it, they will come." And he just looked at me and he said, "Well, you do what you need to do." And so I did. So I set up the office, and at that time, I did have some requests for past lives, but more so now, I'm doing many, many more in a month's time than I would have done back then. Just because people and their consciousness and where they're at.
Now, what are the benefits of a past life then, Bryn? You have more and more people coming to see you now. They're coming in to explore their spirituality, to explore their life purpose, or any other more specific issue. But what are the benefits that they derive from actually having the session?
Well, it helps to bring a sense of peace. It's also empowering to get in and understand the hidden influences that are affecting current life. So, resolving that fear, that energy of the situation that gets trapped deep inside, can neutralize the energy from the past life. It can also bring understanding with relationships, and it can just bring it to a place where you have a more understanding from a different perspective, a higher perspective, instead of just the tiny little piece of it that you're getting now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so they get the bigger picture is what you're saying.
Yes.
So it sounds like, Bryn, when a client comes in to see you regarding their issue, that the past life experience puts their issue or whatever challenges that they are struggling with within a different context, looking through a different lens, if you will, meaning that these issues, because they're part of a soul's development, is part of a higher order of learning. I mean, would that be a fair statement?
Yes. And it just puts things in, it helps things to settle down into proper perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because, having this fear of fire and not knowing why, or a fear of someone that you love dying and not understanding why, but then going into a past life and learning that they were killed, someone broke into their home and, killed them out of anger or something. It just helps them to understand that that came from another place and not from now. So I'm thinking of a session that I had with a client. He had like a trading post out in the woods somewhere way back in the 1700s, 1800s, something like that. And he and his partner had built a really great business, and trackers and all kinds of people passing through would stop through there to get supplies and to trade furs and all of this. And it was in a mountainous area in the US. And so what happened was the authorities came in and wanted to take that land, and he wouldn't give them the land. So they took it anyway, burned the building down, killed his partner, and he was left with nothing. And so through that past life, he just understood a lot about relationships, about transitions in life with business and that sort of thing. And some of those same people are in his life today. However, it's a different scenario because this time something inside him had given him the red flag to make choices that prevented that same thing from happening again. So we're actually doing the past life with that person after these business transactions in his current life, yet he didn't make the same mistake twice. That's what came through the past life session. And it also helped him to see how he had grown, and he's with that person again. He's with that same partner currently. So, despite everything, they got to be back together. And it was also an accident. His partner was not supposed to be in the building. They didn't know that she was in there when they burned it. They were just trying to scare him and take his property away.
Do you ever have situations where the past life doesn't have a correlation to the current life, or is it always connected?
It's always connected. It's just not maybe the way that they thought. Sometimes you might have a dream and you might get little glimpses of something. So when they go into the past life, they might say, oh, I've had a dream that just reminded me of being on the same highway or on the same ship or the same boat. And then other times they might be totally surprised that it went into the past life that it went into, but all the events and the players tie into current life events somehow. It's just, you have to let that past life unfold and find out what's being presented. Sometimes you don't know until the very end of the session why it went to this past life.
Do clients ask you to go back to a specific past life, or is it one of these things where they're taken back by spirit? In other words, the guides and teachers are the arbiter.
Well, that's a great question. It can be that a client says, I just have a feeling that I've had a past life back in Europe. Can you take me there? But often what happens is we take it back, we guide it to a past life that's significant to an issue that the client is presenting, that they're saying they're experiencing at this time. And then there are those clients, if they're just curious, I'll just guide them back to a past life that would be important for us to explore today.
I think there's a misconception out there that people go back, they're famous people.
Yes.
Is that what you find, or do you find they go back into very ordinary types of lives?
I have had people go back to past lives where they were famous and they were known people, but you have to remember that those people that were famous back then, if they were a king or a queen, they still had a soul, and that soul is back on the planet now. But the majority of people go back to normal past lives, normal existence. In fact, most clients are really excited after the session that they got to explore the past life that they got. Every once in a while, you'll get that client that goes back to a mundane past life, and they're like, why did I have to go explore that one? Or sometimes it will be a really dreary past life with a lot of work, a lot of hard work just to prepare a meal. And they'll say, can we please move on to another past life, a different one? But there's a reason Spirit took them to that life. There's something that they needed to explore that they need to know that will help them now.
That's an interesting point, though. Let me just stick on that for a second. So if a client says, gee, this is really boring, could I go to another life? Do you take them to another life? Or no, you're in this past life, so we have to stay and we have to play this out?
I have them stay there.
Okay.
It may seem boring, but there's something important for them to know. Now, sometimes clients that have had pretty chaotic current lives have been shown past lives that were mundane, just to let them know that all of their past lives haven't been this difficult.
Okay.
And sometimes it's the mundane past lives that let them know that they did have a life that was a little slower, where it could be more chaotic or hectic. Or if your life was one where you kept your cottage clean and you made soup and you sat on the porch and whittled. Sometimes I've had a few like that clients have been guided to those lives just to remind them to slow down in current life where they're traveling for their jobs or for their families, or, they lead these busy, busy lives. I did have one client that went to several past lives that seemed pretty tame, pretty mundane. There were 3 that I'm thinking of, and the connection was to remind that person to go back into nature. So now, to connect, they have to go and sit in the woods on a hilltop or in the woods and just feel the earth, to reconnect their body to the earth, because that's what they did back then when they could take a day and just sit on their porch. Their lives were much slower, but they were so happy, such happy past lives. And sometimes people need to be reminded how to bring that happiness and joy back in. So at first it might seem boring, but I'm thinking back to I have a session, one of my cases is in Flipside with Rich Martini's book. And I'm thinking that was the session where she went back to Russia. And at first she was like, that's really boring life. And I was thinking it was so beautiful. It was Russia and she's describing such beautiful things. But she thought it was so boring. But it's such a great story. It's very different from her life now in New York City.
Well, the important thing is they make the connection and they get the lesson from the experience. And how quickly, Bryn, do the clients get that realization of that experience? In other words, when they begin to connect the dots, is it hours later, a week later, months later, or is it longer?
A lot of connections are made immediately, and then it'll continue to make sense and unfold even days and weeks after. I have those clients that immediately upon experiencing the past life, things are starting to unfold, different events, different people come forward that make sense, and they'll recognize that person in current life. Even unprompted from me, they may say, oh, I see a child there, and that's my daughter, and they'll look into the eyes of that child and say, oh, that's my sister in current life. Or I may have the scene fill in, and then I might ask, do you recognize that person in another way? I try to leave it vague, but open enough. And often they'll say, yes, that's so-and-so in my current life.
And it's not all visual.
It's not all visual. So there's a misconception about how memories come through. People read the books and they think everything is visual and it's like a movie. But not everyone processes their past lives visually. Sometimes it comes through kinesthetically, and that's with feeling. So they'll feel it. They'll just know the answers. Now, they're giving great descriptions, but it's not something they're actually visually seeing in front of them, but they're describing the whole scene. So, you could read, like, my stories in the books. Some of those clients were not visual, yet when you read the description, it's great detail. So they know exactly what's happening. They're just not seeing it, like, in front of them on a movie screen.
Do you find the books get in the way?
Sometimes. People will have an expectation. Sometimes people read something and they'll have an expectation that it's going to unfold a certain way, that it has to be this type of session. And so when I have someone that, mentions the books and they say, oh, I want a session like this one that I read in the book, first thing I ask them to do is just put that aside, let go of expectation, and let your session be your own.
So for the sessions, they're bringing in all of their sensory perceptions. They're bringing in feeling, they're bringing in sight, they're bringing in perhaps hearing, everything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And, there are tears, there's laughter, there's a lot of emotions that come through when they're experiencing the session.
Is it basically very objective? You're watching yourself, or is there an emotional aspect to the session?
Oh, even if they're watching, there's an emotional aspect. And if they're feeling, there's an emotional aspect too, for sure.
And so, Bryn, could you describe then when a client comes in to have this experience, what is the process? Because I'm assuming many clients who come to see you, some have had hypnosis, many have not. So how do you get them into that trance state to do the past life work?
Okay, so when a client comes in, they're going to come in and we're going to talk for a little bit. First of all, they're usually nervous because they've never done this before. They're anticipating what could come through. Maybe they're excited about it, but maybe a little afraid. And we just talk for a little bit so they can get used to me, and I want to find out about them. And then we use hypnosis techniques to take them into that deeper space with their breathing, guided imagery. So they're in a recliner across from me in the office, eyes closed, but they're still able to talk and access information, and they're just in a deeper state of awareness that, they're not unconscious. They can hear everything that's going on, but they're more focused on the information that they're getting from that deeper place.
So they're not knocked out and they're not in a sleep state then?
Definitely. It's somewhere just before sleep is how I like to describe it. So I don't get into all the details and the technical jargon about the layers of hypnosis because that makes it too technical for the client who's coming in, and they want to feel comfort going into this process. They want to know that I know what I'm doing and that they can let go, because the client's comfort level is really key here. If they're not comfortable enough, they're not going to let themselves go into that deeper depth. And I can't make them go there. I'm guiding them.
I'm going to assume that rapport with you is very, very important.
Yes, rapport is very important, and it starts from the time they book their appointment. When they walk into the room, we sit down and start talking. They want to know that I'm listening to them and that I'm paying attention to them and that they're being heard, and that lets them feel comfortable to just go into that deeper state. Because if they don't want to let go, if they don't want to, they won't. They'll block themselves.
Because many clients are conditioned based upon what they see from TV and movies. And what you're explaining to me is it's nothing like TV and the movies.
Right. In fact, forget everything you've seen in TV and the movies. It's all fun. It's all funny. But it's really not like that. They're not unconscious. The client is in control. I'm helping to guide them, to facilitate them. And they have to trust and let go, trust themselves. They have to trust me, but they really have to trust themselves enough to let go and go into that deeper space. So when you have someone that's very nervous, or if they're off into their heads too much because they're anxious or they're an analytical type person, you have to help them let go so they can get out of their own way to access the deeper information that's there. Because I'm not reading them. I always tell them, you're reading yourself. I'm not reading you. I'm not giving you a past life reading. I'm going to guide you to a place, and if you follow the instructions that I give you and you can let go, you'll be able to access the information and then report it back to me so that I know what's going on, and then I can lead you to the next stage and then the next stage.
That's an interesting point. You're not reading them.
Right.
They're actually experiencing this for themselves.
Exactly.
Do you get calls, Bryn, where people believe you are doing readings?
Yes. I will get those calls sometimes from that person that will say, I'd like to have a past life reading with you. And I know immediately that I need to address that question or that concern so that they understand that they're participating. And these are long sessions. To do a past life session, you're going to be in that state for an hour and a half, maybe longer. If you're going to do a life between lives session, which is even deeper than this, you're going to be in that state for 4 hours.
Wow.
I've had some of those go even longer than 4 hours. If the client can handle it and I can, we just keep going. So they need to understand that, it's not to be taken lightly. They're going to participate. So they shouldn't plan anything strenuous afterwards. They should have an easy afternoon, take it easy, just because their mind is going to be trying to put together all those pieces of everything they just experienced. And it's nothing more distracting than to leave there and have to run into a board meeting after you've just been in this beautiful spiritual place, and now you're back at work talking business,
That would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the experience.
Exactly. You asked the question about, do the pieces come together in the session or afterwards? I have a session that comes to mind. I had this client who had come to me and he just wanted some spiritual exploration. And, he was in a financial field. He was not in the spiritual field. His line of work was analytical, financial, but he just wanted to explore this. So we put him into a past life, and he experienced a past life where he wasn't royalty, but he was related to royalty. Okay, so he was like the cousin of the king. And what he did was do work as an artist, and he would travel around the different kingdoms because there were big castles and little castles, and all the cousins and the distant cousins and all the relatives had their chunk of land that they owned, and he would go around and paint portraits of his relatives. And in this one place that he went to, he's on his horse and he's going through the woods and giving me great detail about light and color, and it was very descriptive. He comes upon this village that's inside the castle walls and described that to me. And then he moved forward to a scene where he is painting the portrait of the king, his cousin. And the king's daughter comes into the room. Now, he knew some of the people along the way in his current life. But this king's daughter, he did not know, but he was very taken by her. And he was trying to be careful to not get in trouble because he didn't want the king to get upset and behead him, because they would behead each other even if they were family members back then. So he was just trying to be close to her without getting in trouble. But anyway, he just knew he had this really strong connection to her. So following the session, this person moved away. And a year or so down the road, I heard from him. He had moved away and had just come across the woman in current life who had been the king's daughter in the past life. And he had met her, and they were getting married, and he just wanted me to know that he had found her, and he knew that was his soulmate, but she wasn't in his life yet. And so all these events came to pass. He didn't know all of this immediately. He just knew he was really taken by this woman. But several events came to pass. I think his job was downsized or something, and that was the cause for him leaving town. But when he moved to the new location, that's where he met the woman. And there were just qualities that she possessed then that he recognized now. And they've been married, I believe, for a couple of years now. It was a really beautiful session. It was a beautiful, beautiful session.
It sounds like it's very beautiful. And as you're speaking, Bryn, I'm trying to imagine, how does this flow for the client? In other words, is it one continuous stream of memory, or do they have various stops, and then those stops get kind of interwoven and connected by the end of the session? How does that work? How do they experience it?
It's, well, you have a few clients that it's just one continuous stream of memory, but for most, it's a few little stops, a few bits of information, then they get more information, and then it starts to flow a little more smoothly. But it's really moving to the significant events in the past life. And, when you get into that scene, it explains why, and then moving forward to the next significant event to find out more. Then by the end of the life, the client, is on their deathbed, or maybe, events are leading them there. They can gather more information about their life that maybe we didn't make a stop there, but they have information that makes it make sense because, they've already lived past that moment and are at the end.
How about the details, Bryn? Sometimes we read these books, and these books will say people can read street signs, they know their telephone number, they can read license plate numbers. Does that happen all the time, or is that something that we find in the books?
It happens sometimes. I try to get names and dates and places, and sometimes that comes through, and other times, even though you ask, they're not getting that. It's more about the relationship or something that's happening in the life that's really getting the client's attention that they need to know. And then you'll have other clients that really do get names and dates and places very easily. I had one person, he was it was the early 1900s in Chicago, and he was skipping school as a young boy, and he was supposed to be in school because his parents wanted him to grow up and have a good job, and he would skip school and go hang out on the street corner and sell newspapers. So he would do this quite frequently, and he loved it because he made a lot of money, and he started skipping school more and more. He just loved that one street corner. I mean, he would light up when he started talking about how he would stand there and he would be nice to the ladies and he would talk to the kids and the gentlemen in their suits. Like, he was really working them and selling a lot of papers. So I had him look up and just take a look at what was around him. And he described buildings, the names of businesses. He gave me the street corner, the cross streets. And we were able to search that after the session and find out that there actually are places in Chicago with those names that matched that description. But he didn't know that, beforehand.
And how far back do some of these lives go, Bryn?
Oh, they can go back to biblical times. They can go back to caveman times.
Have you ever had somebody go back to Atlantis as an example?
I have.
Okay.
I've had several people actually go back there and describe some of the scientific experiments, some of the technology, some of the things that they worked on back then. I've had clients go to lives on other planets that are not Earth.
I was going to ask about that. That was my next question.
Yes, there's this one planet called the Orange Planet that people seem to really like.
I want to go to the Orange Planet.
I know. I've had people say, "Can I go back to the Orange Planet? That was a really fun one." I actually had somebody, I'm remembering one session where a lady, we were trying to get to the bottom of a weight issue, carrying excess weight in current life. And this is a person that had done a lot in current life to try to release the weight. So she wanted to explore it through past lives. And we found that in one of her past lives, she was a cave woman. She popped into the scene, standing there at her cave, and she's holding her little cave baby, and she's waiting for her husband, her caveman, to come back he had gone off to hunt to bring them food, and something happened, and he never came back, and then they starved to death. So a lot of her feelings and emotions around food came from a couple of these past lives that we explored. She was starving in those past lives. So in current life, it just turns out that her parents owned a grocery store. So she always had food, and that was her comfort. And it was also a beautiful time that she could spend with her dad, who had to work a lot because he had the store, but he could come home and have dinner with his family, but then he would have to go back to work. So her mother would save dessert and let her share dessert time with her dad before, he'd have to go back to work and she'd have to go to bed as a young child. A lot of the fear and just the issues around food were from lifetimes of not having it. Having your crops taken away, your fields burned, a drought, and the cave woman lifetime.
Now, the other question I had, Bryn, is this is not just about experiencing the past life. There's a point where the client in the past life dies and transitions and goes into the spirit world. Is that correct?
Yes. So a lot of the discovery comes in the spirit world after death. Heaven, the spirit world, the place that we return to, which is our true home. The client will go through the past life. They'll go to the death scene. We will have them move through it. We'll find out what their last thoughts were as they're passing, because that is some indication of carryover that they're carrying into current life. If there's some fears, there's unresolved feelings. So that client they'll leave their body, but their soul will pass back into the spirit world, where guides will greet them. And often they're taken to a place of rest and rejuvenation to just release the heaviness from the life just lived. And those places can be very beautiful, very ornate, light showers, crystals, just amazing places. And then once that healing is done, the guide will take them and do a life review. And so the guide will communicate with them. I say talk with them, but it's a form of communication where they just have an understanding of what the guide is saying. Sometimes it will come through images, through words, descriptions that are tying in current life to past life and helping them to connect some of those pieces that maybe the client hasn't figured out just yet as to why they went to the past life that they went to. It's really profound, and guides can show up, they can show up as a ball of light. They can show up in human form with a human-shaped body, wearing robes. Sometimes their faces are just colors of light, maybe not descriptive. Sometimes they describe them as Confucius, like a wise Japanese man, Chinese man, Indian, Asian Indian, American Indian that may show up to greet them. But it's often the guide will show up resembling the life that is going to benefit the client the most. And they'll say that. I'm showing up like this because this is the way you'll recognize me, or this was a good lifetime for you, or this was important, so I need to show up this way because you'll pay attention to me this way.
So religious inclinations, if somebody is a Christian or a Buddhist, How does that play? Do they see Buddha? Do they see Jesus?
Um, no. In fact, it's interesting because current life religion seems to have nothing to do with the way the guide shows up to greet them in the spirit world. I mean, you would think it would be the same, but it can be very different. So sometimes clients are surprised when their guide shows up as someone from another religion. Occasionally, I have once, maybe twice, just maybe a couple of times, I'll say, had a guide show up, and the first thing, because the client, you still got your conscious mind that you're talking through to describe the information. Someone is coming to greet you. Who has come to greet you? And they may say, that's Jesus. And I'll say, okay. And I'll give them a second just to acclimate, because you got to remember, they've just crossed over from death a long ways to get to the spirit world. They're free of that body. They're gone through that healing. And so I'll say, okay, I want you to take a closer look now and tell me what you notice. And that's when they'll usually start smiling, and the guide has started to peel off the costume of Jesus, and now they're showing up as a ball of light energy, often is how they'll come through. And it was just that the client needed to feel comfortable to make the connection for what was coming next.
So it sounds like the soul has to make a transition. It's not like the light switches on, the light switches off when it leaves the body. In other words, you do carry a bit of that life with you as you're making that transition from that death scene, as you're making your way into the spirit world and meeting up with your guide.
Yes. In fact, you've described it perfectly. And it's like, if you're playing in a play, we're going to use the acting analogy. So you're in a play and you've just played that role and you're coming off stage, and now you got to take off your stage makeup. You got to take off that costume because you got to go down the street because you're going to go home and play mom, be mom at your house. Well, that's going to be different clothes that you're going to wear to go do that. Well, it's like you live this life, and then as you're moving through the death scene and the soul is making its way home, it's got to release a lot of that costume that it wore in that life, because now it's soul energy. It's back home and it has access to all that a soul is in that space. We're very limited with what we have access to down here, which is why this is so powerful, because it's opening that line of communication home while we're down here on earth, to remember that we do have support. There are others that are helping us along the way. And we forget that while we're here, but through past lives, through life between lives, you can access that soul level energy and that soul information that gives you access to many, many, many of your lives and who you are.
It's very, very profound work. And I believe that some people understand it to be just that. They just experience a past life. They're not understanding that, no, there's part two of it, which is you transition into the spirit world, and now you're having this experience and these memories with your guide in the spirit world, which is unbelievable. It's very, very profound.
Yes, and our guides, you're right, and it's more than one layer to this. It's not one-dimensional. It's not that you just go, oh, yeah, I had a past life, and it's done. You get to explore the past life. You explore all that is important for you to explore about that past life, and then you go to the between, to where our guides and our helpers, our teachers that guide us while we're here, they're there, and we have a more direct line of communication to find out more and explore more. I mean, it's very profound. It's intense, and it brings up such emotion, because these are the beings that have helped us to plan to come here, and we're reconnecting, we're reuniting with them there, and they're happy to see us, and we're happy to see them. I mean, we know who they are. We know who they are, and they know us. They know us at our deepest levels. They know us like no one else knows us.
Now, what happens, Bryn, once the client emerges from the session? What's a typical reaction?
Once they're coming out of it, the first thing most people say is, wow. And they're just, their eyes are distant. They're sitting up, their eyes are open. I'm putting on some dim lights to just help them get acclimated before I turn on a brighter light. But their eyes are still far away, and they're coming back into this body, into this room. And one of the first things I like to ask them is, so how long do you think it's been? And they'll say, well, I don't know. I said, well, do you think it was a long time or a short time? And they'll say 20 minutes.
Mm.
And that's when I like to say, well, it's been 2 hours. Or did you know it's been an hour and a half? They're really surprised by that. And the reason for this is that when they're in that state, everything is in the moment. And then more moments of being in the moment. And so they're experiencing so much because in that time, when everything's flowing through the session, they're in now time. Everything's in current time and they're flowing. So they're in the past life, but they're experiencing it as now and they're remembering all of it. So they don't realize that so much time has passed as they're remembering all of this. It's memories that are right there that if we talk about it when they're coming out of the session, they have easy recall to all that. But they're mostly, I would say the single biggest surprise is that they were under for so long and that so much time has passed.
Did they ever ask you, was that real?
Oh, yes. Sometimes they might ask if that's real. And I'm never going to try to convince someone whether it was real or not. It's their experience. It's up to them. But sometimes they'll say, that was really wild. It almost felt like I was making it up. So I'll ask them to close their eyes and to point to the part of their head, their brain, where they experienced the memory in the past life. And they'll show me. And then I'll ask them if they've ever been to somewhere like Alaska, or I'll try to pick an obscure place and see if they've ever been there. And if they say no, then I'll ask them to create a memory of being in Alaska, in a cafe in Alaska. Now I want you to describe that to me and give me the details. And they can't.
They can't.
They can't get the detail. That's where it helps them to see also that they're using a different part of their mind, a different part of their brain than what they use to create a memory. Seems like the memories that they're trying to create, like the memory of Alaska, seems to come from the front of the brain where their conscious mind is trying to create it. And these other memories from the past life and the between lives tend to come from deep within the brain.
Well, this is just fascinating work, Bryn, and you're going to come back and do part 2 of this discussion in this interview, and we're going to talk about life between lives. But what I'd like to do now, because we are running short on time, is if you can just give our listeners some information on how to contact you, your website, your phone number, and all that.
Oh, sure. And thank you for having me on, and thank you for having me back on.
You're very welcome.
So you can reach me. My website is brynblankinship.com, BrynBlankinship.com. And I teach hypnosis, I teach past lives, I teach life between lives hypnosis through the Newton Institute, and I also do private sessions in my office in Wilmington. But they are by appointment, so you'd need to have an appointment before you show up to get one.
And you have a couple of books?
Yes, I'm in Brian Weiss's latest book, which is Miracles Happen. And I have a chapter in there that's titled Embracing Equality, and that's my past life session. And then I have a chapter in Rich Martini's Flip Side. And then I have chapter 3 in Michael Newton's Memories of the Afterlife, When Children Teach from the Grave. I'm also working on a book of my own through my session work. It's generated some pretty interesting sessions. And we're also in production for a TV pilot. And I'm not going to give away the title at this point. It's going to be a past life TV pilot, and it's going to be pretty interesting.
Well, when you do get the details, you will fill us in, yes?
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay.
Yes.
All
as
right.
soon as I'm able to disclose the title, I will be happy to share.
Well, Brent, just fascinating work, and I'm really looking forward to part 2 when we talk about Between Lives. So, again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Thank you so much for getting this out there, Mike.
Thank you, Brent. And that concludes our interview with Bryn Blankinship, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And I want to thank everyone, as always, for listening, and thank you for your support in visiting the blog, sageofquay.com. And please check out my album, Leaving Dystopia, at laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.